When you got inside them big old gates, that was a different world. And when you finished of the night and you walked out the old gardener's entrance, out onto the road or a path and going home, it was a different place altogether, wasn't it? Absolutely.
The estate was a little thing of its own. Well, not so little, but a thing of its own. And everything happened inside the estate, both with the farms, the dairies and what have you, was a unit. And beyond that unit, we didn't venture. And nobody came in unless they were asked. You just couldn't walk in the garden those days.
I was 13 when I started gardening. I'm 78 now. And I used to cycle to work, which was 12 miles a day. 12 miles there. Get my dinner from my granny. She lived in the town, which was a plate of soup. I gave her a quarter of tea at the end of the week. And I would bike back. That was 6 days a week.
I started off when I was 13, working for a lady in Herefordshire, on the borders of Wales. I was more or less a garden boy in them days. Hoeing beds and doing all watering and all that sort of thing.
Well, the first thing we had to do was know how to wash pots. Yeah, that was the first job you had to do when you was a lad in those old days, was wash pots. They were all clay pots, you see.
My first job was washing pots outdoors in the frost with cold water. And he said, if you can do that, then we make a gardener of you. Don't wash pots today, do they? They throw them away and start with some new ones. But we did wash pots. We did wash our canes after they'd come out of the soil. We did clean up the raffia grass and make it nice and smooth so that it came out nice and clean, so the head gardener could touch it without getting his hands dirty.
You had to get there 7 o'clock and you wouldn't long before you was round the house all working, getting everything squared up before 10 o'clock and you was out. Nobody in front of the house or anywhere around the house after 10, because they didn't want to see you.
I advertised the Gardener's Chronicle and I got a job at Newmarket. I was 66 in the garden there. And I was just a journeyman and lived in the bothy there. Bothy is a Scotch word, really. It means hostel. That's where all the single chaps away from home lived.
Those days, the only thing for light was candles, you know. All you had was, for heating, you had a big lamp in the ceiling, you know, that hung down. You didn't have any other type of heating. Their old head gardener used to come and tap on the door at 7 o'clock in the morning. And, of course, never ready to come out. And they used to tap on the door and go right round the back. And they'd see them coming out of the windows and back doors, putting the jackets on and half-dressed.
Boots not laced
No.
up. And when you started mornings, it was 7 o'clock, not a minute past. No. If you was late 2 mornings, you was head on your arse and there's somebody else to come in to have the job.
They were like that, you see. You had to be dead on time. If you got there beforehand and started work before 7 o'clock, well, that's it. That's all right. Didn't matter.
You work from Monday morning till Saturday dinner time, or whichever it may be. You'll get your wages regular, but you won't get anything else.
We didn't do any overtime. If you went back and done your boilers on a Sunday, and in the winter time, you accepted that. You never got any more for that. In the winter. 9 o'clock, going back with old hurricane lamp, bank up your fires and all that. Oh yes. You never asked for anything like that. You accepted that.
I think most of us were in the reasonably same background. Parents not very well off. Parents who needed us to get started work at 13 or 14 to get some money in. If you were in a higher class, you didn't do these things. You certainly weren't a gardener. You might have been an engineer or a train driver, but you wouldn't have been a gardener. So our parents, by and large, were either born and bred on estates and knew no different, or they were rather poor.
Oh, yes, they were poor, and they were jolly poor, mate.
I was lucky because my dad was head keeper. I was very lucky. I could get a rabbit if I wanted.
We were very fortunate in that first bothy because our foreman was the son of a keeper, Lord Derby's keeper, and he taught us how to poach. So the odd pheasant and the odd duck and the odd thing came in the bothy.
The old head gardener would never give you a thing. If there's peaches hanging up in the net, those going rot, and that's where they stayed.
I remember on one occasion there was a peach on the floor. It was broken, and I picked it up, looked at it, and I thought, oh golly, I'll eat this. The head came along, he said, Hooper, did you see a peach on the floor? I said, yes, sir. He said, what did you do with it? I said, ate it. He said, why? I said, I thought it was no good, sir. No good or good, he said. It still belonged to Lord Wrexham, not you.
My God, no gardener's here, you can't pick up no... Ooh, no. If you pick it up, you give it to him.
He was very strict, and if you didn't do as you were told, you had one warning, and after that, the sack. No question. No one ever had a second chance. And we weren't allowed to help anyone that got the sack. We weren't allowed to help them to the station with their stuff. He must look after himself, and we weren't allowed to even speak to him, really, because he's sacked out. It was a time of high unemployment. Labour was cheap and easily available. So his attitude was, if you're not good enough for me, I'll get somebody else who is.
You had to mind your P's and Q's, because if you answered back, you got the sack and there was a bloke waiting outside the gate to take your job, wasn't he?
There was an advert in the Gardener's Chronicle the next day. Head gardener wanted at Tring Park for Lord Rothschild. And I thought, oh, well, I'd love to have a look at that place. I rang the bell, and I think there was about 70 of us in the garden there. And I rang the bell, saw the head gardener. He showed me round, and he said, well, of course, I didn't ask you to come for this job. I should have shoulders of applications of this job, but he said, anyway, I'll choose 5 or 6, and I'll put you with them. And he said, if you should be successful in getting the job, he said, well, then I'll pay your expenses for coming down. And so I said, thank you. I didn't think I had a hope in hell of getting the job. So I thought, I'll give you one back. So I said, well, of course, if you did offer me the job, I'd have to think twice about it. I'd been used to something better than this, and I got the job.
I was invited to go to Gatton Park for an interview. And when I got there were 17 of us waiting for this interview. And we all had an interview with the head. And he said to me, go outside and wait. When I'd finished. And he said that to 2 other people, go outside and wait. So there's 3 of us left, and all the rest were just got rid of. And we went in for a second interview. And I was number 2 of the 3. And he went right through what I'd told him before, through my references, which I had to show him, what I had from other houses. And in the finish he said, can you play cricket? I said, oh yes, I play cricket. Job's yours then.
Pay was terrible.
One day when I was working with Tom, the old boss come out and called, Everett, come over here. And I see he pulled a envelope out of his pocket and undid it and showed it to Tom. And he had a little natter, and when he came back he said, go on, Barry wants to talk with you. So I went over and he said, here you are, look. He said, read this letter for me. And we had 2 big landowners next to each side of the estate. And these blighters had got together and wrote a letter to Benny to say that it had come to their notice that he was paying us a lot more money than their men were getting, and we were looking less hours. So would he please reduce our wages down to their level and make us work more? Well, I said, the buggers, aren't they?
The important to remember when you're talking about this is the hierarchy of the garden.
Yes.
The governor, the lord, the earl, top dog. The head gardener, his spokesman. Under him would be 3 or 4 foremen.
Yeah.
Under those foremen would be 3 or 4 journeymen, 1, 2, 3 and 4 journeymen. And below that would be a couple of boys. In each section of the garden there would be a foreman, his staff, remember, not the head gardener's staff, the foreman's staff, and the boys.
Yeah.
And the boys were trainees. Now this was Bothy life as it was. The demands came via the head gardener all the time. Us as under gardeners, we didn't really ever talk to the gentry. All came through the head gardener. And he would say, look chaps, there's such and such a thing going on up there, now you stop it, or do it as the case may be, because madam don't like it or madam does like it.
I can remember that I went down to the big house for something or other, and I went through across the hall to go down to the cellar, and I was whistling, and still whistling down there, and came up, whistling right away through the hall and out away up the garden. And it wasn't long before we heard the bell go. That was the bell for the head gardener to go down to the house. And eventually he came back up and he said, Herbert, you're wanted down the house. So I went down the house and saw the odd man, and he went and got the footman, he got the butler, and he said, all right, come along with me. We went along the big hall and round into the study, and he knocked the door, and the gentleman said, come in. So he went in, the butler went in and come out and shut the door again. He said, Mr. Darcy Watson wants you. So I knocked the door, he said, come in. I went in there and he said, Winborn, he said, I don't want you whistling in the house. If I hear it any more, he said, then you'll go. And that was it. And I never did whistle in the garden anymore, and that more or less stopped me from whistling.
The lady and the gentleman, they were wonderful people. When you hear about, they were ordered about and all that, no, we never had that.
You hardly knew them.
They were condescending more than friendly.
If we was working down the drive and the carriage came by, or later the car came by, you always stood up and just raised your hat or took your hat off. If they come round the garden, you never took any notice, never said nothing, unless they spoke to you, and then you would just say yes or no. Oh, yes, that was the times when you had to raise your hat and say, madam, yes, madam, no, sir, yes, sir. But those old days are gone now.
Of course, today they take the shirts and vests off. You weren't allowed to do that. They probably had gardener, if it were done at my old place, well, you get your things on and you go. We don't want you.
They usually knew when he was coming round. You tidied yourself up a bit and you really got on with the job, you know. You weren't allowed to speak to him unless he spoke to you first.
Jeremiah Coleman was the owner, the mustard people. Stacks of money, and he was a man who you couldn't talk to because he wouldn't speak to us as employees, so you couldn't speak back to him.
You couldn't object. Well, you did in your own mind, perhaps, but not verbally. You'll be out straight away.
You'd call it by his surname, which you expected. I had one person say to me, you don't mind me calling you White? Oh, I said, I prefer it. Then we've got this distinction between us two, and I respect you for that.
When I was with the Morrison people, that Mr. Morrison, he was Conservative MP for Salisbury District, and I was working in the gardens. And by that time I got to 21, we were told to go and vote for Mr. Morrison. Told to go and vote, yes. Yeah.
Well, you just considered you were one of those, you see. You had no other views. You entirely for the estate.
Not that I did mind, because I was a bit rebellious at the time.
I never lived in a tied cottage. I always swore I never would. I'd rather take the most inferior job that was going than be tied.
They wanted your wife to work for them, yeah. Go in and help them out. That's what they did. Well, my wife went round and helped them out in the house when they were short, you know. But I had a tied cottage. Oh yes, but they never treated me like had that power over me. Some of them have, but then they weren't what I call a real lady and a gentleman.
They expected me to go to church on Sunday, and you went. Lord Denman and her ladyship was in their pew, and they always knew when the old gardeners came in, of course they only had their own hobnob boots on, and they used to walk up the old grating, and that used to rattle. The head gardener always went, and if you didn't go, he'd want to know why, because her ladyship would ask him why so-and-so wasn't there, and if he was laid up, she'd say, well, do they want anything, especially if he was married. And if you wanted anything, she used to say, well, you better go to the grocer's and get a parcel made up. And they always looked after you there. And one thing they used to do, when they went on holiday, they used to bring a little present back for everybody on the farm and in the garden. I don't know how it was with you chaps.
We had them for Christmas Eve. You all had to line up and go up in your age group and how long you'd been at the job. The head gardener never used to go. He used to wait till you'd all gone, and he'd go and see the governor afterwards. But you all went up in your turn. See the lady, went to see the gentleman as well. He would give you some money, and the lady would give you this parcel. Now, fruit, vegetables, cigarettes, packet, and you weren't allowed to smoke on the place, but she'd give you a packet for that day, and your knife, a gardener's diary, and all this sort of thing, crystallised fruit, Christmas pudding, couple of chicken.
Married men had 10 shillings and single men had 5, a Christmas box.
And we used to have a New Year's Eve party, and there was cakes, dancing, everything that you could think of in the big hall, in the big house, to make everybody happy, and you respect your gentleman, and it made you proud to think that you was one of that part of that garden.
The gardens really were good. On one occasion, we opened our garden to the public, and the public were under the impression you would never find a weed at Gatton Park, ever. And one day, one chappie came along to me and my mate and said, I found a weed in your garden. One weed we didn't see, and this man came and told us he found a weed in Gatton Park Gardens, which was 10 acres in extent. So you did it. You had the manpower to do it.
You done the drive with a knife, no weed killers and used on those places. You used an old knife.
Old table knife?
Yes. I've still got mine, over 40-year-old, my old knife. And you raked the paths, they're all granite chippings.
And then after we'd done about 7 or 8 yards, used to drop back, especially if it was raining, with the big old roller.
Yes, and roll it back again.
And roll it back in.
Yeah.
And that used to leave smooth, and it used to be lovely, didn't it?
That's it.
It used to correspond in the old edges of the side of the drive.
Yes.
That was always edged up and swept up every Friday.
That's right. And Saturday we went round with the other chap who was above me in the greenhouses, scrubbed through all the steps and brass over the doorknobs, clean the doorknobs.
Take the gravel off the benches, through a sieve, and wash the soil off, the dirt, put it back so it looked nice and clean and immaculate. Have you syringed the peach trees twice a day? Yes, sir. Well, we better do it again.
One of the jobs was painting the fig tree for mealybug. With the methylated spirits, this mealybug is a little fluffy thing that gets in all the cracks and crevices, and we used to have to go over it with a brush, a little tiny brush, with methylated spirits.
We didn't have the mechanics, we didn't have rotavators, we had to do all the digging by hand. We never used to use the artificial fertilisers the same as I use now. It was mostly wood ash, that was a great favourite, wood ash. And I never had this John Innes's compost. I used to have to make up my own. Every gardener seemed to have his own little secret.
What we used to do, we had 4 tennis courts. There were 3 for the gentry and 1 for the staff. There used to be a big old cesspit there and a big stone cover with 2 big rings on, and that used to be emptied out of the night. They used to get the builders in, the 2 labourers who come in, and take the old slab off, and there used to be a crust on top of that old cesspit about 9 inches thick. Well, they used to take that off, put it in the wheelbarrow, and wheel it up top the orchard, and they used to just have a galvanised tin over top of it. They used to have 4 or 5 wheelbarrow loads up there, and they was big old wheelbarrow loads, and tip it up there, and that used to dry. And in the summertime, the old garden boys used to go up there with an old rammer, and they used to ram all this old sludge up. It was all dry. It used to be like a lot of powder. And they used to put that in wheelbarrows and take it up in the potting shed. Under the potting shed bench, we had troughs. And we used to shut that in. There used to be sand and leaf soil and loam and this old sludge. It was called your own back. And they used to use that for mixing. They used to have a double handful of loam, sharp sand, a bit of leaf soil, and a couple of handfuls of your own back, and by Jove, that is to make stuff move.
I never used that, but we did use pig and cow manure, put it in a bag, hessian bag, of course, those days, and put it in a big tank of water and let it soak for a day or two, and then stir this up. It used to stink beautifully, and this was what we fed our part of that, I suppose, 2 pints of this stuff out of the tank where the soot bag was to 2 gallons of water, and that was roughly what the plants were fed on.
Well, I always said, if I went to garden today and the man said, what do you want? I'd say, you let me have the farmyard dung and the soot. I said, I'll get my own wood ashes. I'll garden with anybody. I don't want the other stuff at all.
The slaughter, down the butchers. The chap does all the slaughtering, the cattle. You went down in periodically or eat and give them tell them that you wanted so many tubs of blood. That went on the vine border. Bluebot was coming after this blood, you know. Watery, see, running. So we had to water it in pretty quick. And another little trick they had donkeys years ago. If there was a dead sheep, dead horse, dead cow, dead anything in the animal line, and they deliver that and you'd bury it in the vine border outside.
We didn't resent having to do what we did do because it was the order of the day, and we just accepted it as the thing to do.
It was a wonderful system in those days. There was no grousing. We know no unions. I'm not criticising unions. They could do what they like, and I done what I liked. And I was free. I was free to do my work, and I was left to get on with it.
You used to be proud of working there.
You were proud of your job. The doctor called his wife, come and have a look at this magic. And another job I done, he said the same words, and he called me the maestro to his relatives. Come and look what the maestro's done.
Oh, yes, definitely. Oh, yes. You could go back and look and say, my God, that looks good.
We never had time to complain. It was too nice. We realised how much worth these people were. I never worked for people like it. And I wasn't what we call a crawler. You've heard of them, haven't you?
Yeah,
get round the people. But I had one place, I was called back, well, just stand here. And this chap had done a bit of crawling. I want you, the lady, here. Now, tell me again in front of old Fred what you told me about him. And as luck we would have it, I was working next to the River Thames in those days. So I frog marched him and pushed him in the river. Yeah, it was in the summer, mind. And when I rowed him back over in the boat, I said, don't you ever come back in here and again. I said, you keep away.
In the mansion itself, the house steward was in charge of the whole caboose. He was in charge, in fact, of the butler, who in turn was in charge of everybody else, including the cook and the housekeeper, although in a sense the cook and housekeeper, were a law unto themselves, so much so that the lady of the house was not supposed to go in the kitchen to talk to the cook about menus only at specific times, because the cooks wouldn't have it.
I remember once there, Lord Ross said to me, he said, I was thinking about the car, he said, had a bit of a rattle in it outside the front door, he said, and I could see what was happening. He said one of the oil holes was blocked up, and I thought, well, what can I block that with? And I thought to myself, well, the staff will be at lunch, I expect they'll, if I go down to the kitchen, there must probably be a skewer in the old chef's drawer. I went down there and got one. I came back, he said, the staff had just had their part of their lunch. He said, and their second was just going in, and they had a lovely a pudding, he said, with golden syrup on it. He said, it looked lovely. And I said to the housekeeper next day, was any chance of, don't think I'm grumbling about what you send me up, but could I have one of that, like the staff had? She said, certainly not. I said, why not? Well, he said, fancy you going to a board meeting and then happen to tell your your directors, he said that I feed you on syrup, pudding and syrup. He said you couldn't have anything like that. Oh, no. He just had to take that.
We looked after the cook and the kitchen maids in particular. They too had their odd bunch of flowers or grape or peach or nectarine or whatever, so we could get the odd bit of meat left over from the mansion down the bothy, which we did. It was all part of the scheme of one part of the unit helping the other, which we always did.
They all cook. Not a secret. Call out, Fred. Come round the back. There was a blessed great jug of soup. I'd cover it over and take it home. Things like that. And you might have half a dozen fresh herrings. Yes, you did. She gave it to you. Well, these other staff didn't want it. They got all well fed. Housemaid, parlour maid, kitchen maid, and all that. They had plenty of food. But cook always used to look after us.
After the 14 War, it carried on more or less as it did before, more or less. But when the last war started, that was the end of the gardeners as we knew it.
They sold the place in 39. Well, I don't know. I hardly dare to tell you when the old gentleman died what he left us. £1 each. I've been there some 35 years. Oh, that was wrong.
Tax stopped the people from having the money. We were taken out of the garden to go in the forces or whatever, and they had to make do with the best they could, and they've done it ever since. Just make do. So instead of having 40 chaps at Garden Park, there's probably 2.
There's only the very rich people that can really keep their place going. Now, where I was, there were Colonel Loader, that garden's down. Colonel Warren's, that's down. Smith's down. See, they can't afford to keep them up.
Oh, it is sad. When you go around the gardens, they're absolutely derelict. I'm saying all the borders have been turfed over or chucked a bit of grass seed down and they've run. Nothing is looked after, nowhere like they used to be. Those good old days are gone, mate.
Good old days, yes, they were.
Very good days. Absolutely.
I'd do it all again, old chap. I would. I'd love it to do it all again.